Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today we're going to read a story from Nosleep by S.G. Woodhouse. Let's begin. We found a way to listen to the afterlife, and what we heard terrified us. I was working as an audio technician at the time. Mostly freelance, I did odd jobs for films, music, artists, and even a few well-known podcasts. When I was approached by a company specializing in R&D, I initially thought that they'd made a mistake. Their email was rather mysterious. We're looking for an experienced audio technician for one of our projects. We've listened to your samples, and your sound processing skills in particular seem to be exactly what we're looking for. Your participation will be remunerated up to $3,000 for 3 days of work. If you are interested, please reply within 48 hours. As the nature of this project is highly confidential, no information will be passed on to you about the nature of this project before you sign an NDA. To avoid wasting my time with a hoax, I asked for a face-to-face meeting at their company headquarters. To my surprise, they immediately agreed, and the next day, I had an appointment at their premises at 9 a.m. I announced myself at reception, and a woman in a white scientist coat who introduced herself as Elizabeth invited me to accompany her to her office. After signing the NDA and my contract, she led me through a maze of corridors to where I would be working. You'll soon understand why we had you sign a confidentiality agreement. The research we do here is highly confidential, and we've already made a major discovery that just needs one last push, she said, turning to me with a smile. I hope I can help you in the way you expect, I said, still in the dark about the mission I was about to be given. We arrived in a spacious room already occupied by another man, also wearing a white coat, and whom I assumed to be his superior by the authoritative look in his eyes and his advanced age. Mr. Meltron, I presume. Darren Dallon, Chief Scientist. Delighted to have you with us. Please, sit down. I sat down opposite them on a table that was empty except for a strange object whose origin and function I couldn't account for. Mr. Meltron, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You're going to be involved in the most important project of your life for the next 3 days. Do you see this device? He asked, pointing to the object in the center of the table. This device is what I've been working on for at least 20 years of my life. You see, I've always been certain that there was life after death, and this device, I'm convinced, is what will enable me to prove it. I inspected the object more closely. At first glance, it didn't look much, about the size of a laptop and just under 12 inches high. It was entirely black, and only a circle like a loudspeaker in the center of the upwardly exposed face was visible. It was connected to a portable keyboard that sat right in front of the scientist. We can't reveal precisely how it works, but to put it simply, this device allows us to listen to the frequencies that, until now, had never been reached. Frequencies that we are certain correspond to the beyond. You'll understand the problem we're facing, Elizabeth said, pressing a key on the keyboard in front of her and looking at a screen I assumed was on the other side of the device. Instantly, a sound from elsewhere pierced my eardrums. The sound was unmistakably high-pitched and seemed static, despite the fact that I had the impression of hearing pitch variations without being able to distinguish them. Elizabeth finally cut the sound with a grimace after pressing a few keys. Mr. Meltron, we're not asking you to believe us about our discovery. All we're asking is that you work hard to analyze and filter this sound and turn it into something usable. I was circumspect, but they both seemed very serious. You really think there's something in that sound? What do you think it is? A silence fell. Elizabeth looked at her superior out of the corner of her eye without intervening. Yes, Mr. Meltron. We think there's something in the sound, as you say. Your work begins today, and Elizabeth will show you the equipment at your disposal." I set to work. I was allowed to use all the equipment in the lab, computers and all, including the device in question, but I couldn't take anything home or work from home. Everything had to be done on site, and every second had to be recorded by cameras and microphones. I recorded a sample of the sound and started by trying to filter it. I'd already worked on the sound that was cut, corrupted, of poor quality or whatever, and I used every technique I knew to try and clean it up. I spent the entire first day on it, to no avail. The second day I continued in this direction, not knowing what else to do. My attempts became more and more desperate. I honestly couldn't see how they expected me to get anything out of that uniform, shrill sound. I decided to concentrate on my ears and listen to the sound produced by the device over and over again. There was definitely something strange about it. I don't know how to explain it, but the more I listened to it, the more my breathing quickened, as did my heart, and part of my brain screamed at me to end it or run away. So much so that I was beginning to fear continuing to listen to it. After all, it was supposed to be a sound from beyond, according to them, although I wondered if this scientist hadn't just gone mad trying to find an answer to his obsession. The second day ended like the first. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound kept echoing in my head. It was as if by listening to it over and over again, it had become imprinted on me. I had the impression of discovering new facets, new variations. It was as if the sound was still happening, but in my head, and I couldn't stop it. I turned over in bed for the 15th time and stared at the ceiling. And the vision that came to me stunned me. At first, I thought I was imagining shapes moving because of the darkness. But, like the sound, the more I concentrated on what I was seeing, the clearer it became. There were dozens and dozens of faces, their horrified expressions distorting their features as they blended into the ceiling and seemed to be trying to break out, to extricate themselves from the solid matter. As the faces tried to push against the darkness to get out, I could hear the sound in my ears getting louder and louder, sharper and sharper. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid it would suddenly stop. I could hardly breathe. They were there. They were coming out. And for some unknown reason, I was certain that if they reached me, they'd take me with them. With that thought, I jumped out of bed and in 2 steps reached the light switch in my room and looked up. There was nothing there. And the sound, though persistent, was a distant echo in my head. On the third and last day, I sat down at my workstation with dark circles under my eyes. I'd spent the rest of the night on my feet, trying to think of a solution. I approached the device again, and after a moment's hesitation, my instinct screaming at me not to press the key, I turned it on. Again, that shrill sound, so unique, flat, and endless. That's when it hit me. I remembered the first impression I'd had when I heard it for the very first time. A feeling of missing something behind the uniform appearance of the sound. What if there were so many sounds that the mush coming out of them made them impossible to discern? I stood in front of my computer and spent the rest of the day isolating and slowing down the sound to an extreme level. It was 7 p.m., and I was finally ready to do a test. At the same time, Elizabeth entered the room. "The time you were given is almost at 0, she said, with a compassionate smile. I think I found the solution. Are you ready?" Her eyes widened, and she sat down on a chair next to me in silence. I started the modified recording. I never imagined I'd hear what I heard. an incredible number of heart-rending cries from an infinite number of people, men and women of all ages. Elizabeth's face turned pale, her gaze locked with mine, both her hands trembling slightly on her frail legs. The screams continued to fill the room, each passing second seeming to increase the pressure. I stopped the recording. My superior is going to want to hear this, and apply it directly to the device to get a real-time translation. Can you do that? She seemed terrified by her own request, but like me, she didn't really have a choice. We had to go through with the project. Sure, Elizabeth. I should be able to do it in 10 minutes. Just give me a little time to grab something to eat and drink in the cafeteria. And I'll bring something back for you too. Despite the fact that the old chief scientist had heard the modified recording, he still asked me, as Elizabeth had planned, to apply the filter to the live sound. And when the device came on, indeed we heard again the screams of what we assumed to be human beings. And it wasn't the same sounds over and over again. It sounded like it was constantly changing, as if the sound itself was alive. The two scientists chatted quietly at the other end of the room, and finally came back to me to congratulate me on my work. They both looked satisfied, but I sensed they were still in shock at the implications of all this. I told them that to finish, I just needed a little more time to refine the filtering and write down the method for them to follow once I had gone. I spent the rest of the night working, and after a while, I realized that it was past midnight. I was just finishing tidying up my desk when suddenly the shouting stopped. That's when I realized that the device had been on all this time. I couldn't believe it, but I had to believe it, because now it wasn't screams I was hearing, but the slow breathing and exhaling of someone or something. After a while, it said something in a language I didn't know, but which I assumed was something close to Latin. Then, nothing. I switched the machine off and on again, once, twice, 10 times. Only a deafening silence, and my jerky breathing filled the room. I explained what had happened before leaving. Fortunately for me, as it was all recorded, I had proof that I had nothing to reproach myself for, and they had a clear record of what the voice had said. I spent weeks trying to make sense of the sentence myself, but the more time passed, the more the words escaped me. After a while, I simply got on with my life, but the experience left an indelible mark on me. Even today, in the silence of the night, I sometimes feel as if I can hear a high-pitched tone echoing deep inside me. And I know that if I concentrate just a little bit on it, I'll hear again the horrific screams of that endless human tide.
Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The story in this video was read with the author's permission. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit post. Want to support me? Check the link below where you can leave a tip if you wish. And remember, don't let the shadows